Barnes & Noble Union Square, please give a warm welcome to #1 New York Times bestselling author Chloe Gong and international bestselling author Elizabeth Lim.
Hi.
Hi. So this is actually our first time meeting each other in person, and I am just so excited to celebrate Foul Lady Fortune with Chloe. Chloe, can we all give her a round of applause? Another one, yes?
I'm so excited to celebrate with you. It's an honor to have you here with me.
Thank you.
Oh.
Can you tell us about your book?
So, Foul Lady Fortune is a spin-off to the original These Violent Delights and Our Violent Ends duology, but if you haven't read the original duology, you can jump right in. You don't need to know anything before going in, except there will be some fun Easter eggs if you do know. It's set in 1931 Shanghai, and it follows Rosalind, who is a national spy, a national assassin turned spy, who gets paired with Orion Hong, who is a bit of a playboy. They have to work together, pretend to be married, and get to the bottom of a conspiracy involving imperialism. Because that's fun. Joking, it's not fun. There's a lot of banter, there's a lot of, jokes that you would expect out of something adapted from a Shakespearean comedy, and I had a lot of fun writing it, so I'm really excited to celebrate it with you guys. Thank you all for coming out, and yay.
Yay. So I was going on a mini Shakespeare rabbit hole this morning to read about As You Like It, and I had no idea, connecting the dots, that Rosalind is a very similar name to Rosaline from Romeo and Juliet. Was that planned from the beginning? Did you know early on when you were writing these violent delights that you wanted to write a story for Rosalind?
I knew by the end of These Violent Delights, but at first it was a bit of a coincidence. Okay. So what had happened was that Rosalind Lang is technically Rosaline. She comes from Rosaline first. But then I finished writing These Violent Delights, and I thought, I think there's something here, and I think I can make a story out of this. So way before I even knew what Foul Lady Fortune would be about, I did know it was going to be about identity and playing pretend, the stage, things like that. And by coincidence, I discovered that As You Like It was, the protagonist's name was Rosalind. And I thought, okay, this really works out. So then you can kind of see, These Violent Delights already sets up Celia's name. It sets up, I think that might actually be the only one. It's just Rosalind and Celia. But I needed to know that before I had put them as characters in, because I wanted them to then have this duology.
Lady Fortune was watching over you.
Exactly.
So how do you want readers to feel about Rosalind? For readers who have read These Violent Delights and These Violent Ends, do you want their opinions to change from after reading Foul Lady Fortune, or?
Hate her forever. No, absolutely, because I think I describe Foul Lady Fortune as a redemption story of sorts, but, to be honest, it's not really redemptive in the sense that I'm changing what she did, right? We don't suddenly come up with reasons why she, spoilers for the original duology, I guess, betrayed people. It's more that when you actually step into someone's shoes and you see the world from their eyes, you realize they're not really a bad person, they're just a person, and you kind of understand why they did the things that they did. So, in These Violent Delights and Our Violent Ends, she was written intentionally to be a bit antagonistic, right? Because she's supposed to be this foil to the protagonist. And for this duology, I wanted people to go into it and see okay, it's really fine that you thought she was annoying as hell in the first duology, but the important thing is that you then walk away from this kind of being oh, I get it. If I had been you, maybe I would have done that as well, instead of being oh my God, that was the most annoying girl I've ever met in my life.
Did you encounter any challenges in adapting a comedy this time as opposed to a tragedy?
Well, I had to write fun stuff. I'm kidding. Yeah, I think so, because when you're writing something set in 1930 Shanghai in particular, there's a lot of dark stuff in history. And it's very hard to kind of toe the line between portraying the history in a respectful and authentic way, while also showing these kinds of light moments that genuinely emerge between like teenagers. Like you get a bunch of 7 teenagers together, they're gonna crack jokes. They're going to say really out-of-pocket, ridiculous things. And I wanted all of that in there. I wanted people to laugh. I think Foul Lady Fortune is my funniest book. It's also like my darkest book in a way. And I wanted that to be able to come hand in hand. I feel like we should be allowed to have that kind of like space to, experiment in genre and all of that, to write that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we still don't know how it ends, so you're keeping us on our toes.
Yeah.
Like, is it going to be a comedy or tragedy? We don't know.
No, I've promised that the sequel is going to be happy. I'm like, you know what? I scared people by saying my tragedy duology is going to hurt. So I'm telling people my comedy duology is going to be happy, and no one believes me. They're like, you're lying to me. And I'm like, I swear I'm not. And they're like, no, I don't believe you.
That's good. I want to be kept on my toes. I like the suspense.
Yeah, good.
Cliffhanger. So you mentioned that the book is set in 1930s Shanghai. Did you have to do any fun research, or was there any research element that didn't make it into your book?
I think there was a lot of research that didn't make it into the book because a lot of times I will research more than I actually need so that I'm using research to understand the atmosphere and kind of just get myself in the headspace of that time period more than actually like write it in, right? Like I'll find really ridiculous facts that I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. And I'm like, I can't put this in. If I put this in, I'm gonna bore all of you to death. And that's kind of like a lesson learned because this is my 3rd like historical inspired book by now. Like the first These Violent Delights, there was a whole chapter way before it even met like my editor's hands where my agent was looking at it and she went, we have to cut this chapter out, like this is a textbook. And I'm like, you're right, you know why? Because I was writing it with a textbook in front of me. And I was just like, this is fascinating, oh my goodness. And I'm just like repeating the textbook into the book. Sorry, that was a tangent to basically say like there's a lot of stuff I find really fascinating, but I do all of that research just so I can understand the kind of worldview and the like world like eyesight that my characters are taking. But otherwise, I try to take like the human angle. I'm like, what would this character be thinking, or what would they be feeling more so than? And then on this street and this corner and 500 miles away from that street lamp, there was da, right?
Yeah, I agree with you on there. Like, I personally could probably write pages and pages on what they were wearing and what they were eating.
And I would read all of it.
But probably not everyone would enjoy it as much. But I don't know, the fashion back then was just so gorgeous, which leads me to ask you, I think Chloe's dress tonight is absolutely stunning, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Chloe, can you tell us a little bit about your dress?
Hashtag spawn. This dress is by the designer Claudia Lee. She's a Chinese New Zealander designer, and it's just, it goes with the pink version of this cover more so than the gold, but it felt fitting. It's definitely not like in the era, it's not 1930s. Maybe I'll pull out a 1930s like cheapao for one of the other events, but for this, it's like it's the extravagant show nature of it.
I also love that in the Grim you mentioned that the designer was Chinese New Zealand, so that's like very close to home for you. Yeah,
like it's my exact identity. We're identity besties.
So you have made a lot of books in readapting Shakespeare. Is there anything else up in the works for you in the future?
Well, I have an adult trilogy coming that's inspired by Antony and Cleopatra. I'm really excited about it because I kind of describe it as, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I might get in trouble for saying this. My adult trilogy is like if Romeo and Juliet's dynamic was on crack. Like, it really is in the same way that if you ask like a Shakespearean like, English scholar person, they can find a lot of similarities in Antony and Cleopatra the play and Romeo and Juliet the play, because they're both about like, star-crossed lovers in a sense with Judy and family stuff, but Antony and Cleopatra is very much the adult version where it's like duty and like nation kind of more so than young love and like family and environment and stuff like that. So it really felt cool to have done Romeo and Juliet in my YA space and then go into the adult space with Antony and Cleopatra, because I really feel like then I could make use of the age category I was in. But Was that the question?
No, I think you answered it really well. And I'm just also fascinated because I also do think that there's a lot of similarities between the two stories, like Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra. And it's really interesting how you put it, that there's more duty involved and like, just more responsibility, I guess. Yeah.
As we learn when we become adults.
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone's excited to read your take. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for everyone to read it after you guys read this one, of course. Don't skip books.
And the sequel.
And the sequel, yeah.
So have you always been a big Shakespeare fan? Like, I read that you studied English in college. So was he one of your favorite authors, or did you despise him at first and then come to appreciate?
Did I have a hate-to-love relationship with William Shakespeare? I had always liked Shakespeare, I think. So I had a really good high school English teacher. And he was really good at teaching us, I think we started with Othello, Hamlet, and there was another one that I'm forgetting now. But he was really good at kind of not forcing us to read Shakespeare to just like brute force get the words into us, but to make us understand that this is a performance. It's a play, first and foremost. It's not just the text. And it's like the language and the kind of like what it evokes is the most important part. So a big part of my love for Shakespeare isn't just the play itself. It's kind of like the themes and the like emotion that kind of comes with it. Shakespeare is really, really dramatic. If you haven't read As You Like It, like just try flipping through one of those I'm sure Barnes & Noble carries it. Like one of those like smaller renditions of it where they have like explanations at the bottom. There are so many parts of As You Like It where Orlando is just like completely being a clown, and then Rosalind, the Shakespearean character, is just like sassing him like to no end. Like it's genuinely really funny, and like I'm always really surprised because who knew humor existed 400 years ago? But I've always loved kind of what it brings, I think, and so. In college, I studied it a lot, and I wrote my papers on it, and I kind of dug in deep on the craft level.
Yeah, and one of the things I've always appreciated about Shakespeare is that a lot of his female figures are actually really strong, and obviously you've translated that into in your own way. Who are some of your favorites?
I really love Shakespeare's Cleopatra. I think that's one of my favorite Shakespeare characters because she's so fascinating without completely getting villainized. Like, to be fair, yes, she is villainized to an extent, but there's so much to work with. And I think Shakespeare kind of went off on that. Like, it's just, there's a lot of like three-dimensionality.
I haven't read that one, but it's going to be next on my list. Okay. Yeah. I've always found her a fascinating character. So, what else have you been working on lately?
Well, when I'm not trying to write the sequel to this, because I still haven't finished it. Well, I finished it. No one get any ideas. There's the novellas coming, which is Foul Lady Fortune 1.5, but also These Violent Lights 2.5. It is a novella set, two novellas in a box set that bridges the stories between Foul Lady Fortune and how These Violent Lights left off. And I'm really, really excited for people to read it, but also for people to just find out about it, because so far we have not announced anything about it because we don't want to spoil Foul Lady Fortune. However, I will say, I think I have left so many clues everywhere. And, I'm sure so many of my readers are Swifties. I'm like kind of mad that no one's worked it out yet because I know you guys are good at working this stuff out. But yeah, it's called Last Violent Call, and then the novellas inside are called A Foul Thing and This Foul Murder. And I'm just excited for people to see it.
One of my favorite things as an author has been creating like a universe where I can beat some of the same characters over and over again. And you had mentioned that you started writing Foul Lady Fortune while you were finishing up These Violent Delights. So as you were working on These Violent Ends, did you start to come up with some ideas and like make some bridges between the two? Can you share any of those?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I had come up with kind of the base idea for Frau Lady Fortune as These Violent Lights was finishing up, which meant by the time I was writing Our Violent Ends, it was kind of like the exact narrative I was giving Rosalind is what she would be starting like Frau Lady Fortune with. And I don't think there's any specific scene I planted in just with that pre-knowledge, but I will say I think there were some lines I wrote in where I was establishing her humor, if that makes sense. Because I had always known that Rosalind was going to be the type of person with a very like dry sense of humor in the way that you don't really find her funny until you like her. You know those types of people where they are kind of funny, but you don't want to admit it because, you know. I think specifically there's that one scene in Our Violent Ends where Rosalind is like, she says something about twins fusing in the womb. I don't know. I don't remember the exact line anymore. However, there was just a very strange, like scientifically inaccurate thing she just threw out there. And from a craft perspective, I was thinking, when a reader gets to the scene, they're going to be like, oh, what a strange line. But if you planted that exact scene into the middle of Frau Lady Fortune, you'd probably laugh. And I wanted that to be the effect I had in my head, because that meant like your feelings towards her as we're finishing this duology where she's not the main character is just going to be kind of like at best, and like I hate her at worst. But then you flip to Frau Lady Fortune, and if I've done my job right, you would react differently. And again, I'm never going to know that, right? It's a thought experiment. I'm never going to transplant the conversation into this book, but it was something to think about.
Did that reflect how you felt about her as an author when you first wrote?
Oh, I've always loved her. Like,
Okay.
I have to. I have to, right? Because I've always sympathized with her having her full backstory in my head, I guess. But as far as presenting it to the reader, I don't want to manipulate the reader into feeling what I feel. I want the reader to come up with their own judgments based on what they see and what they experience of the story. So it's like, I've always been like, oh, she's so me-coded. But for the reader, I want them to stumble onto that as we enter more of her story.
Would you say she's one of the characters that reflect you the most, or is there another?
I think so, yeah. I think she does take a lot of me, but again, I do think most of my characters I will try give a chunk of myself.
Okay.
Like the more that I can do that, the more real they feel. I mean, do you do the same? Do you try to carve up pieces of yourself and give them personality traits?
I don't think I do that like consciously.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, yeah.
I think maybe after I finish I finished a draft or two, I'm like, oh, there's a piece of me there that I'm not going to ever tell anyone about.
Yeah, you can't admit it, because otherwise, well, now you know my deepest, darkest fears. It's all on the page.
Or my fears.
Yeah.
Were there any characters that were really difficult to write?
I think the characters where I am not necessarily bringing like to the forefront, but I don't want them to be forgettable either, are sometimes the hardest ones.
I find that too.
Yeah, right, because with main characters or with major characters, you're like, well, I'm going to develop you. You're going to have like emotions and arcs and all of that. But then sometimes there'll be kind of side characters who are there to represent an idea more than anything. So like in Frau Lady Fortune, Rosalind and Ryan go undercover at a Japanese publishing house because they suspect that the Japanese Empire has started like a conspiracy in their city. And then of course, like I'll be writing characters within this publishing house who aren't necessarily a part of the conspiracy, but they're still, you know, a part of the empire. So I was like, I want these characters to be fully fleshed, and yet I want it to be nuanced enough that it represents that people can be complicit to ideas while not actively being like oppressive. And I was like, this is a lot to try to achieve with characters who appear like twice within like 5 pages, right? But then it's something that we just have to do to pull it off. Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like the harder you think about it, the worse it appears on the page. So you just have to
Just do it.
Yeah, just do it, and feel confident about it. Yeah, I find writing large casts to be really difficult.
So difficult, especially when they're all in one scene together.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my God, where is this person standing? Who just said this? Like, how do I even navigate? I have to start drawing things out.
Same. Yeah, and then it's constantly like, oh, this person said, that person said, and it gets a little tedious to read, so you have to find a way to make it elegant. We're getting into little crafty things. Well, speaking of craft, though, what is your typical writing day like?
Chaotic.
Chaotic. Okay,
Completely
I love
chaotic.
that.
I think it's because I don't really have a routine. I kind of write whenever I have time in between, like, trying to, like, live like a normal human being, right?
Okay.
Because, like, you know, work-life boundaries, right? What are those? I try to, like, put things into my day where I'm like, okay, I have to go get a silly little coffee, or I have to make some sort of appointment to, like, take care of myself, or like, oh, I haven't seen this friend in a while, I'm gonna get lunch with this person. And then writing fills in the gaps of everything left undone. I feel like you're looking at me, you're thinking about your 2 young children. You're like
No, I think it's great to get fresh air. Before I had kids, I was probably more similar to you. I was like, I'm going to go to the gym, go for
the gym, that's not me.
No, that was more a reason to get out. Sometimes I didn't actually make it to the gym, but it was always on my calendar. Yeah.
I think actually leaving the house, I have to do that.
Yeah.
I have to do it. I have to leave. I have to go somewhere. And then I find the words start from there. As soon as I establish, like, okay, we're in a different space. This is not the sleeping area. This is the writing world.
Do you take notes in a notebook, or do you text yourself? I have an ongoing conversation with myself that's thousands and thousands of texts long, and my husband's always like, who's talking to you at this hour? And I'm like, oh, it's just me texting myself.
Wait, I love that. I don't have a text conversation with myself, but I have a very hefty notes app.
Okay.
It all goes into my notes app because I know that I mostly use that for writing stuff. Mm-hmm. And then occasionally there's stuff like things to pack, chargers.
I just like texting myself so I see the alerts. And I'm like, oh, I have to make it down to 0. Yeah. So let's see, your usual day is chaotic, but when you are writing though, like what is your process? Like, can you sit down and do you just have inspiration and you write for hours, or you just take little bits of notes here?
I'm usually like a long session type writer where I will set out to be just like working for like a huge chunk of time, but I can't sit still like for the life of me. You can probably figure it out right now. Like I'm always moving in some way, right? But I will sit down for like 20 minutes, write a few words, I'll wander off, do something, maybe like get a coffee if I'm like, I used to use like a co-working space, but less so now. I go to cafes, so I'll like go get a little coffee, I'll go to the bathroom, or I'll just like walk around. 'Cause I don't know, I feel like sometimes like actual physical movement kind of gets the brain going.
I think so too.
But otherwise it's like I just try to get as many words out as possible, because I feel like revision is kind of where the actual magic happens, whereas like drafting, I'm kind of just like, if I can get it out, that's good enough.
Do you like drafting or do you hate it?
I really actually love drafting.
Okay.
And I don't like revising as much, but then I can understand that revising is what makes it better.
Yeah, drafting is exciting. It's exciting because everything seems fresh and new, and it has possibilities. I personally, though, I hate drafting because I just like...
Scandal.
I know. Because I'm just like, oh, nothing makes sense. I try to draft really messily. So I just bounce all over the place and nothing makes sense.
Yeah, my drafts, I try to make them as clean as possible, but then I'm like, I think it's a mental thing. I'm like, if I can tell myself that this is the worst it's ever gonna be, it motivates me to be like, okay, I can see what's like at the end of it. But I get itchy if the drafts are messy. Like the sequel of Foul Lady Fortune, I sent it in to my editor, who's in the crowd, and I went, I am so sorry. There are so many holes in this. And then I actually sent her the meme of, do you guys know the horse where it's drawn in stages? And the first part of it is like incredibly detailed, and then the last chunk is just like a line sketch, right? I was like, so this is what my draft looks like. Please be prepared. And then I had to push it off. I had to click send.
I think that's why I hate drafting so much. I just feel itchy for the entire time. Yeah. But then when I start to clean it up, it's like having put on a balm. But yeah, I feel you on there. I just sent my editor something too. So just like, try not to think about it.
Exciting. The rest of us were excited, but for authors, when you send off the drafts, you're like, oh.
Yeah, it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
don't read this yet. Just
Yeah.
take your time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so what, can you tell us maybe a bit about your world building process? I know we talked a little bit about research, but like for those of us who maybe haven't heard you speak about it, how did you come up with like 1930s and 1920s Shanghai for your books? It's such a fascinating time.
Yeah, I mean, I got started in like 1920 Shanghai because I was so obsessed with the time period. It was one of those things where, you know, like Republican era C-dramas are like really popular. If there is kind of like a period piece that isn't necessarily focusing on the war, but it's not a, you know, like pre-Qing dynasty, it's like the 20s and the 30s, because that's when they could wear like the pretty clothes and like they didn't have to deal with like the conflicts yet. Well, they did, but not to the extent of like the war dramas, right? Mm-hmm. So I had grown up watching a lot of those.
Same here.
Yeah. And they're so fun. There's so
and
many
violent,
plot twists.
though.
They're violent, and they have all these like completely left field plot twists.
Yeah.
And I love the drama of that. But for me, a lot of the time was I was always having trouble following because they didn't have English subtitles. Mm-hmm. They were just speaking like Mandarin. And in my household, we speak Shanghainese, so my Mandarin is completely guesswork. Like, they're kind of similar enough that I can guess.
I grew up speaking Cantonese. So
yeah, so you understand. You understand.
Yeah.
It's like we understand the general gist of what they're saying in a conversation, but then if they have like some one line that's like super romantic, I'm like turning to my mom, I'm like, what'd they just say? So, you know, there was always that aspect of really love the theme, really love the drama and the angst, but having trouble following. And then on the flip side, I kind of grew up reading YA, where I was like, well, I really love the act of like reading YA, but you know, why do I never see like the 1920s and like, you know, 1920 Shanghai specifically in these stories? And it's like, well, of course you don't. Like, who's writing them? And the people who are writing them are often writing about like, and then the British detective walked into the city and solved the mystery all on his own for some reason, even if he doesn't speak the language. So yeah, to circle all back, the reason why I wanted to do 1920 Shanghai was to have that kind of middle bridge, right? To be writing something YA that I really love with the kind of like content I was seeing in the media that I enjoyed because my parents were putting it on. And then in general, like my parents are always just talking about like the golden era of Shanghai because like they're from there and they have like a lot of like, you know, love for it. So I would hear them talk about things that I should include, or this one time at a family dinner, like when I still could go to Shanghai and COVID hadn't shut down the world, my great uncle spent a good 40 minutes, I think, talking about one pillar in this building on the Bund. So I tried to work that in where there's the appearance of the HSBC building in one of the books. I don't remember which one, but I did that because he spent 40 minutes telling me about it. Didn't describe the pillars. I don't think I did that. But I was like, I'm gonna disappoint all of my ancestors if I can't put that one detail in.
Did you tell him about it in the book?
I don't think I have yet. I should do that.
You should, yeah.
Actually. Yeah, I'll do that.
Have your relatives read your books? No.
And I hope they never do. Yeah, they all really want to, but they all like they don't read in English. So I'm like, thank you, thank you, yeah.
Yeah, my mom still hasn't read most of my books too, but I'm kind of glad. Just don't.
Yeah, no, my mom tried to once. I think she got like 3 chapters in, and I was like, you can just put it down there. That's fine. You've read everything.
My mom picked up the sequel when she was visiting me, and she was like, "Oh, I don't have to read book 1. Like, I'll just start with the sequel."
Oh, of the Dragon's Promise? Or
yeah,
the other
and I was
one?
like, "No, that's not how it works. You're not gonna understand what's going on."
Oh my god.
She's like, "You can just tell me." And I was like, "Okay." So since your family is from Shanghai, I actually really want to talk about something very important and serious. I know you've only been living in New York for like 1 or 2 years now, but do you have any favorite Shanghainese restaurants in the city?
Oh, such a question. I think there's that, there's U Garden in Flushing. which I think is Shanghainese food. But I will say, I actively try to avoid Shanghainese food here sometimes because I'm like, if it's disappointing, I just get mad.
Yeah,
right?
that's fair.
I'm like, I could be there right now, but a virus had to shut down the world, you know? I usually, I don't consume Shanghainese food that often outside of my mother's cooking or Shanghai
That's fair.
itself.
I feel the same way about Cantonese food sometimes, but I think it's gotten better over the last few years here in the city. So maybe Shanghainese food will have a renaissance here too.
I hope so.
It'll get better.
Yeah, I hope so. If anyone out there is ready to open a restaurant, please do it.
Okay, I think we're ready to take questions now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Audience. I can also start with, so we have a list of questions that were submitted online. I can start with one and then we'll go to the audience questions.
Sure, that sounds great. Guys, get your questions, start thinking.
Okay. I'll pick one that we can both answer. When did you first realize you wanted to be a writer?
Okay, I'll go first. Actually, this was a big surprise for me because I didn't want to become a writer at all.
Oh, wow.
For a long time. I really enjoyed writing fan fiction. I wrote Sailor Moon and Star Wars and Sweet Valley fan fiction for a really long time. And that was the extent of my writing career, actually, because I was a really serious musician from age 4 on. I wanted to become, I went to university and grad school for music, and I wanted to become a film composer. So I wrote on the side as a way for me to become better at understanding narrative, because I was like, that'll make me a better film composer. But then, like, I don't know what happened, but in grad school, I guess, my course load was pretty boring. So I was like, oh, I have a lot of time. I'm just going to try writing a novel. And I just got really sucked into the process and just enjoyed myself so much. Like, I even kind of enjoyed the rejections. Like, not really enjoyed them, but like with each one that I got, I was like, okay, you know what? I am going to get better at this and like get an acceptance. I don't know. It was kind of weird, like Sisyphean thing. But yeah, and then I guess from there, when I actually did get an agent, I was like, okay, maybe I do want to become serious about this. And I actually just really ended up loving it. I find it very similar to writing music. So that was my journey, and it still surprises me. Yeah. How about you?
I love that. For me, it was, I had always written casually, but I never imagined being a writer, like with a capital W, right? Because writing to me was honestly an extension of reading, where I was always reading throughout high school, and it was kind of more a way to like, you know, like escapism and like buying, you know, just doing something with my time, right? It was a hobby, if anything. I think that's a good way to put it. And then writing was something I took on the side because I would often run out of books to read. Books get to New Zealand very slowly, so we don't get new releases like, well, we didn't used to. I got tagged in quite a few Happy Valley Fortune Day from New Zealand today, so I was like, wow, things are changing. Yeah. So we didn't used to get new releases very fast, which meant like the latest, you know, YA novel I was reading, like when it released, I had to wait like a good few months to get it. I would always get it from the library. Which, you know, love libraries. It just, for me, it meant I was like number 193 on the Holtz list, especially in suburban Auckland. So writing was kind of this thing where I was like, I'm just going to make up a few chapters, like after I finished my homework. And then I kept writing, and that became like, you know, by the time I graduated high school, I had written essentially like 8 books, except I never imagined it as, oh, I've written 8 books. I was like, oh, I've put up 8 stories on Wattpad, right? Very different feeling. So I never imagined myself as a serious writer until I got the idea for these Vinyl Delights. And I thought, I think I can see this like on a bookshelf somewhere. Like I think I could go reach in and pull it out. And I think I can imagine that other people might want to do that as well. Mm-hmm. So I only really pursued the actual act of writing when I got the idea for that.
Yeah, oh, I love that. And it worked out.
It worked
Here
out.
we are.
We're here now.
Awesome. So let's take some questions from the audience then. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Let's go right over here.
Is there going to be any sapphic couples in this book or any future books?
There are sapphic characters in Foul Lady Fortune, so Phoebe is bi, but I don't think there's a couple coming up anytime soon. There's a couple in Immortal Longings, my adult book.
Excellent. Any other questions? Yes, right over here.
So you both talked about writing while you were in college or in grad school. How did you find time to balance like your writing, your creative endeavors with your schoolwork, and was it like a reprieve from the rest of class?
Honestly, I kind of snuck writing in as like homework assignments. I was in music grad school, so it might be a little bit different, but I had a composition class where we would write like opera scenes. And as an excuse, I was like, I'm gonna write my own opera. I'll write my own libretto instead of taking one from a source. And it was extra work, of course, but I got to pass off like homework as also creative writing, which was kind of fun. So a little sneaky, but it worked out for me, and it actually made the project really, really fun.
I think for me, writing during college became something that I really had to timetable in, because I knew if I didn't prioritize it, I wouldn't get it done. And I knew, right, that writing was actually the thing that I was enjoying, like more so than like writing my essays or like doing the extracurriculars. But it's so easy in college, I think, to be like, I don't have time to like do this chapter right now. Like this assignment is going to be due soon. This other thing is going to be due soon. And kind of like you, like I treated it as if it was something I was eventually going to like need to turn in, and there would be, I don't know if this is healthy exactly, but I was like, okay, there's going to be a penalty if I don't turn it in, right? It's something that I want to value as much as my classwork. And I will say, like, sometimes that doesn't necessarily work for everyone because it needs to fit that particular criteria, right? Like, if you do have a class that you absolutely must pass, like, yes, pass that class first. Don't go writing your chapter. But for me, like, I was an English International Relations double major. Like, it's not the end of the world if I turn things in, like, at 11:59 p.m. I still turn them in. That's important. But I would be like, okay, these hours are designated for writing time. I'm gonna treat this as like my 7th class on my class schedule. And to do that, it meant I was getting like equal output for both classwork and for writing.
Right over here.
Hi, thank you for this event. It's been so fun so far. Chloe, I noticed that your historical fiction is very vibrant and very immersive. Like I feel like I'm in the 20s when I read your work. Is there something that you think about when you're writing historical fiction to like make it feel real, or something that you really pay attention to?
That's a really good question. I honestly try to seek out visual media first, and I think that shows in my writing style, and I try to make it show, right? It's more so in the original duology than this one. There would be certain chapters that were kind of omniscient views, like over the top of everything. And the sole purpose of that was to build a sense of the world so you understand where the characters are living. And I think it's really important to me. And because of that, I always will take a focus into being like, you need to know what things look like before we proceed, so that this world is very tangible and like visceral in a sense. So yeah, I look up pictures, I try to watch movies set in that particular time period, or, honestly, like sometimes Pinterest is like really good. Like, like I wouldn't do all the research on Pinterest, but sometimes if you're just trying to look at a picture of a ballroom or like a street, a shop thing, sometimes it's really helpful to just have that reference.
Do you want to do another virtual question?
Sure. Okay. Let's see. Okay. There's a question that asks, which films or songs reflect the book's vibe? So I'll also direct that question to you for The Dragon's Promise.
Okay. This is a tricky one. Which books or films? I don't think anything's directly inspired my Six Crimson Cranes Dragon's Promise duology, although like I absolutely love Howl's Moving Castle. So I think some of the like vibes and feels, especially in some of the romance part and like just fantasy, probably inspired me. Yeah. How about for you?
Did this question say song as well, or just? Yeah, what films or songs reflected? Okay, so the number one song that Lady Fortune can be encompassed by is Taylor Swift's Right Where You Left Me. And Tashi Buyan, author of Counting Down With You, is putting her hand on her forehead right now. Probably because she heard me playing this on repeat when I was writing some of the first drafts when we lived together last year. It's really, really fitting. Like, I'm shocked that Taylor Swift did not directly break into my brain and see this book and then write the song, because, you know, the song's about feeling like you're just stuck at one age forever because that's where you got left behind. All your trauma is just sticking you there. And Rosalind is quite literally stuck at 19 years old because metaphorically she cannot move past this trauma and the things that she did wrong to leave her in this kind of broken state. So it's a very good song.
Anybody else have questions?
How do you cope with rejection?
Like publishing rejection or
Yeah.
general rejection? Well, you see, when they send...
Publishing rejection. Yeah.
I think one of the most important things to remember is that publishing is so subjective. And one person's "this didn't work for me, this sucks, this is the worst thing ever," is another person's "this is the best thing I've ever read in my life, and it changed my life, and it's gonna follow me around forever," right? So when it comes to getting your foot into like the traditional publishing industry, it's really about finding that one yes at a certain stage and then finding another yes at a certain stage, and that's all it takes, like at the end of the day. The only thing about rejection that can stop you from succeeding is giving up because of it, right? So you just have to keep moving forward. And I liked the way that you put it, how it was always a motivation to then get the acceptance.
It was. I think for me, I probably wrote like 4 or 5 books before I got one that was accepted. So I would get to various stages of publishing, like, they're talking about it in the meeting room, like, and then it just got rejected by the top person. And so it was, I feel like I've experienced a lot of different stages, and each time, like, obviously it hurts, but then it's like, oh, you're getting closer and closer, and you're just improving as a writer. So I would say that, like, it's very important to persist, but it's also important, I think, to keep writing and to dream up the next idea and keep working on that, because you do really improve with time, I think. Yeah.
Any other questions? Right over here in the glasses, there's going to be a mic right behind you.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One of them is, you write, there's a lot of sibling dynamics in this book. So do you have any siblings of your own, and like, how did you make that feel so real? And my second question, I don't know how much you can go into this without spoiling, but how did you come up with the code names?
Very good 2 questions. So to answer your first one, yes, I do have siblings. That's where all of it comes from. I'm the eldest out of 3. So a lot of Rosalind and Oliver's eldest sibling angst is like, I'll pull for myself. Orion has very classic middle child syndrome. I'm not going to speak on my brother. He'll be like, But I think when it is a set of 3, the middle one really has a particular, like, you know, a syndrome, right? So I dig into that. I really dig into that. But, you know, I think sibling banter is one of the most fun parts about writing, like, especially this age range. I think a lot of times, like, in YA particularly, we'll make siblings be, like, really serious against each other, like, so, like, oh, you know, I'll die for you, I'll do anything for you. You kind of forget that one of the most basic parts of being a sibling is just irritating the hell out of them, right? And that doesn't mean you wouldn't die for them. You can, it's, you know, the range is large. I'll leave that at that. And then the second question, how did I come up with the code names? So this is actually really funny. Rosalind and Orion's dual code name when they go in undercover is High Tide. I did that as a reference to it was something in As You Like It. It was just a random reference to some, like, thing. And then Sharon J. Zhao, the author of Iron Widow, went, Chloe, did you know that that's Chinese slang for orgasm? They were like, Shakespeare would be so proud of you. And I went, oh my God, I did not intend that in the slightest. But to be fair, it is very Shakespearean. So I guess, you know, was not intended, but it's a part of the canon now, I guess. But for, Rosalind's codename is Fortune. It's really just, it's a part of the kind of, again, most of it is drawn from the Shakespearean side of it. The idea that there's always something ruling over you, something like guiding your hand. And I thought, wouldn't it be so great if an assassin was codenamed Fortune? And then I don't know if it's a spoiler. It's a spoiler to tell you other people's codenames, but I think I'm excited for people to kind of get to them and be like, oh, I see what you're doing there.
Anybody else have any questions? Right over here in the glasses. There's going to be a mic right behind you.
Hi. I kind of wanted to know, like, outside of writing, how amazing it is for you to, like, find a set of friends or, like, a community. Because, like, we all follow your TikTok, and we think, like, that's so funny to, like, when you and Alex are together, or you and, like, Destin, or you and Tashi, or, like, I think Calvin's here, too. Like, everybody's here, and, like, it's so shocking for us to see, like, all of our faves. It's like the Avengers assembling.
Oh, my God.
But, like... How do you think, like, not just like opening doors opportunity wise, but like opening doors like with friends? How has like writing changed that for you?
That's such a good question. I really do feel like we need to be like, okay, Avengers assemble, stand up. It's one of those things where I'm like, having friends in this industry genuinely keeps you sane, because writing is so solitary. And especially publishing as an industry, there are just certain things where you just want to be like, oh my God, like, ugh, right? And then the other person's like, oh, I know, right? In ways that, as much as I love my friends outside of publishing, they're not going to get that immediately. So it's one of those things where, like, I'm so grateful for the kind of friends I made before I even published these Violent Delights. Like, all of my friends are, like, ones I came up with, I guess. That feels pretentious to say, but like that I grew into publishing with, because they know who you are, you know who they are, and you're just going at it together. And for any like aspiring writer like in the audience, finding your friends like at the stage before either of you have really done anything is like a really good way to find those forever friends, right? Because things start getting like, once you get out there into the industry, it's like there are so many people, right? You can't befriend everyone. You just need to find your crew and hold them tight, and then they'll be at the front row of your release.
Okay, I think we have time for about 2 more questions. Do you want to do one more virtual?
Sure. Yes, indeed. Okay. Need to find a good one. Okay. There's one question that asks, where's your favorite place to write? I guess physically.
I write anywhere I can bring my laptop. Yeah. What about you? I'm like,
right now, I was about to say where my favorite place is to write, and then I was like, I'm doxing myself. Like, we all live in New York. I like writing outside recently because the weather is still nice, that it's not cold yet, but it's not like hot. So I really like writing outside, especially because I really love people watching when I write.
this is a good city for that.
Yeah. The best city for that,
Yeah.
one could say. Yeah.
Okay, last question from the audience. Who has one? Right over here in the glasses.
Hi. So my question is, considering that these Violent Delights duology is a YA novel series, duology, and Foul Lady Fortune is also YA, how are you dealing with the transition from writing YA to an adult novel while also, like, having to bounce back and forth since you're a machine and constantly churning out something new?
I am always writing things. For me, I honestly find it pretty easy to keep YA and adult separate in my head because they have very different tones to me. So YA, I always try to keep like hope at the heart of it, because I know that when you see the world as a teenager, you want to be able to see that there's like a path forward. You want to kind of feel as if things are messy and angsty, but almost steady in a way. Whereas I feel like when I'm writing adult, things are always just up in the air. Like there's just so much like ongoing, because I want to capture that sense of like, you just never know what's going on like as an adult, right? Like everyone doesn't know anything. You have no like guiding figures. It's just right? But I also think the kind of like themes I gravitate towards will always be different. Like in YA, I like writing a lot of like forgiving yourself and, you know, finding yourself. Very classic like teenagery or like coming into adulthood things. Whereas an adult, I'm kind of just, you know, I don't even have like, sometimes I don't have a motive going in. I'm like, how do I make these two characters as toxic, obsessive, and messy as possible? Yeah, that's my Immortal Longings pitch. Two characters compete to see who can be the most toxic.
Awesome. Well, Chloe, Elizabeth, thank you both so much. Can we give them a round of applause, please?